The skies above Karun 7 bled with fire as Drexar Swarm ships descended, their black carapached hulls blotting out the twin suns. The Velari defenses cracked like glass beneath a hammer, cities falling one by one under the tide of alien claws. In the command spire of the capital, General Thielen stood rigid, his silver crest dimmed with despair. For all their centuries of technology, for all the fleets they'd built and the treaties they'd signed, the Velari Union had no answer for this. Their only choice was a signal one they had sworn never to use unless there was no hope left. The signal had been sent. It wasn't just a message of distress. It was a prayer whispered into the dark, carried across the void on encrypted bands. Directed toward Earth. The humans, those unpredictable allies, were feared as much as they were respected. To call them was to admit you had exhausted every other option. To call them was to unleash something far worse than what threatened you. Hours passed. The Drexar pressed their attack, wings darkening the horizon. Thielen stood at the edge of the tactical display, watching the red icons devour his world. Whispers filled the command chamber. Velari officers murmured in low tones, repeating the warnings they had heard in diplomatic halls. If humans come, it is not the noble ones, not the explorers or ambassadors. It is the broken, the exiled, the killers who breathe war the way others breathe air. Then the transmission came. A voice, ragged but calm, carried through the static. Message received. Rescue acknowledged. Only the deadliest have answered. Thielen felt his crest bristle. The chamber fell silent. No one dared speak. Moments later, fire cut across the night sky. Ships dropped from orbit, angular and black, their hulls marked with crimson skull insignias. They did not descend like a fleet of saviors. They plummeted like predators who had scented blood. The Velari watched in muted horror as the craft's heat shields burned trails of red across the atmosphere. When the dropships landed on the outer barrens, the air shuddered with the growl of engines. Out stepped human men, taller and heavier. Then the Velari, armored in matte black plates scarred from dozens of campaigns. Each moved with an ease that spoke not of discipline alone, but of a familiarity with violence so deep it was second nature. At their head was Captain Darius Kane. His face bore the ravages of war scar, tissue crossing from his jaw to his temple, one eye gleaming with an artificial implant. His voice was measured, but every syllable carried weight, as if he knew nothing but command. He scanned the Velari officers with an unsettling calm, as though he had already calculated their worth, and found them wanting. To his right stalked Sergeant Elias Ward, his grin sharp beneath a crooked scar on his lip. He carried explosives as though they were toys, humming an old Earth tune under his breath. His eyes danced with the kind of energy that unnerved even his fellow soldiers. There was something wild there, a man who found joy in chaos. Behind him moved Lieutenant Marcus Veyne, silent, his gaze cold as a rifle barrel. He carried his weapon slung with casual precision, every motion deliberate, his steps like the steady ticks of a clock. No words escaped him, but the intensity of his stare made the Velari avert their eyes. And then there was Corporal Rhys. He was broader than the rest. His armor fitted tight to contain his bulk. His knuckles were scarred, his jaw square, his expression one of restrained violence. Rumors clung to him even before his boots touched Velari soil. Pit fighter, killer, man who had survived trials no civilized species could imagine. Thielen stepped forward, forcing his voice steady. We are honored by your arrival. Our enemy grows by the hour. We feared none would come. Kane's gaze fixed on him like a blade pressing against flesh. We came. That is all that matters. Tell us where to strike. The Velari officers shifted uneasily. They'd expected a briefing, strategy discussions, perhaps weeks of coordinated planning. Instead, these men radiated an energy that felt primal, immediate. Kane didn't ask about defensive grids or political ramifications. He asked only where he could kill. Thielen hesitated, then activated the map. The Drexar breach lines are here, spreading into the valley. If they are not stopped within 2 cycles, they will overrun the capital. Ward chuckled, tapping a finger against the display. Then we blow the valley. Trap them in their own. Advance. Let's see how fast they multiply when they're eating rubble. A murmur rippled through the Velari. The suggestion was madness, sacrificing half the region to crush an enemy force. Kane didn't flinch. He nodded once. Good. Efficient. Veyne leaned closer to the display, his eyes flicking over distances with machine-like precision. I'll. Need elevation here? The ridgeline. Give me 1 vantage, and I'll cut their officers before they breathe a command. Rhys said nothing. He only cracked his knuckles, his gaze fixed on the valley as though he could already see the slaughter to come. For the first time in cycles, Thielen felt something other than despair. It wasn't hope, was fear. Not of the Drexar, but of what he had unleashed. These men were not saviors. They were predators wearing the shape of men, carrying humanity's darkest truths into battle. The ground rumbled as more dropships landed, their doors opening to disgorge crates of weapons. Stacks of munitions and machines designed not for defense, but for eradication. Kane's voice carried over the storm of activity, sharp and unyielding. You called us. You asked for rescue. But understand this, we don't fight wars the way you do. We don't defend. We don't delay. We end. Thielen swallowed hard, but nodded. He had no choice. The Drexar were at their gates, and salvation, however monstrous, had arrived. That night, the Velari skies burned with fire, not only from the enemy's descent, but from humanity's answer. In the darkness beyond, the ridge's Drexar forces gathered, their wings churning the air. And in the shadow of their approach, the deadliest humans alive prepared to meet them. Kane stood at the forefront, his voice low enough that only his men could hear. This is just the beginning. The swarm thinks they've seen war. They haven't seen us yet. The words hung in the air like a promise, like a threat, and the night itself seemed to tighten, waiting for the violence that was about to erupt. The Drexar came at dawn, the swarm a living storm that rolled down the valley with a sound like thunder made of teeth. Their wings cut the air, their bodies a tide of black chitin and hunger. The Velari defensive lines faltered at the first wave. Shields sparking, plasma bolts flaring uselessly against numbers too vast to count. Yet at the ridge above, 4 human figures watched with an unsettling stillness, as if the chaos below were nothing more than a stage prepared for them. Captain Darius Kane studied the terrain, the implant in his left eye glowing faintly as it calculated trajectories and kill zones. He did not flinch at the Velari screams rising from the valley floor. To him, death was inevitable, and his task was not to prevent it, but to direct it. Ward, he said, his voice a calm command. Light. The canyon. Sergeant Elias Ward grinned as though he'd been waiting his whole life for the order. He tapped the detonator fixed to his wrist, and the mountainside roared. Entire slabs of rock sheared free, crashing down into the swarm with a violence that split the air. Dust and alien ichor sprayed upward in a grotesque rain. Ward laughed, a harsh sound that carried over the battlefield. Now that, he shouted, is a proper good morning. The Velari on the line faltered in shock. No commander among them would ever have sanctioned such reckless devastation, not with their own troops so close. Yet the humans moved without hesitation, their brutality as precise as it was merciless. Kane didn't bother explaining. He only gestured to Veyne. Lieutenant Marcus Veyne was already prone, rifle settled into the crook of his shoulder, the barrel steady against the ridge. He exhaled, and the weapon cracked once. A Drexar commander's head split like a shattered crystal. Again the rifle cracked, and another fell, its shriek silenced before it reached the air. Veyne did not smile, did not gloat. He worked with the calm of a craftsman shaping stone, each shot deliberate, each kill a part of an unseen design. Below, the swarm recoiled in confusion. Where other species would collapse from fear or flee in terror, the Drexar hesitated, their hive mind fractured by the sudden loss of direction. And in that hesitation, Corporal Rhys moved. He broke from the ridge like a thunderbolt, sliding down the scree with a combat knife in each hand. The Velari officers watching cried out in disbelief as he charged directly into the swarm. No shield, no rifle, only steel and fury. The first Drexar lunged, its mandibles wide, and Rhys drove his blade through its throat in a motion so fluid it seemed rehearsed. Another pounced, claws raking his shoulder, but he used the momentum to drive both of them into the dirt, stabbing until the creature's convulsions stilled. He roared wordlessly as he tore free, blood Dalian and his own slicking his armor. Ward detonated another charge to clear Rhys's flank, and the corporal surged deeper, carving a path not with strategy but with savagery. Velari eyes followed him in horrified fascination. To them, battle was coordinated, clean, fought with rules of engagement. Rhys was no soldier by their measure. He was something older, a reminder of the beasts their ancestors had once fled in the wilds. The Drexar regrouped, surging again, pressing toward the capital. Kane's voice cut through the comms, sharp as a blade. Push forward. They break. Before us, it was true. The swarm, for the first time in its relentless campaign, faltered. Not from superior firepower, not from numbers, but from something else, something in the way the humans fought. Where other soldiers feared death, these men seemed to embrace it. Their wounds slowed them little. Their laughter, Ward's in particular, echoed unnervingly across the valley. Even the Drexar, mindless in their hunger, hesitated at the sound. The Velari troops, caught between terror and awe, pressed their advantage, emboldened by the humans' ferocity. Plasma fire rained into the swarm, and for the first time since the invasion began, the defenders pushed the enemy back from the valley floor. Daways later, silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the crackle of fires and the wet hiss of Drexar corpses dissolving in their own fluids. The Velari stared across the carnage, unable to reconcile what they had witnessed. To them, war was a grim necessity. To these humans, it seemed something else entirely, an art, a calling, perhaps even a kind of joy. Rhys returned last, dragging the carcass of a Drexar officer behind him, his armor dented, his skin slashed in half a dozen places. He dropped the body at Kane's feet without a word, breathing heavily, eyes still burning with a feral light. Kane only nodded, as though acknowledging a completed task. Ward spat into the dust and clapped Rhys on the back, laughing again. "You're a mad bastard, Jonah. Remind me to keep you between me and anything with teeth." Veyne said nothing, merely cleaned his rifle with methodical care, its expression unreadable. General Thielen approached cautiously, his crest trembling with unease. He had watched them turn the tide, had seen the Drexar fall where no Velari defense had slowed them before, yet he felt no relief. The humans were not saviors, they were something else. "Your tactics," he began carefully, "they are unconventional." Kane's gaze fixed on him, cold and unwavering. "Unconventional wins. You asked for rescue. This is rescue." Thielen's throat tightened. He wanted to argue too, demand restraint, but the words died unspoken. He looked over the valley instead, at the devastation wrought not only by the Drexar, but by the humans who had met them. The land was scarred, broken, littered with corpses. And yet the capital still stood. Kane turned away, his voice low enough that only his men caught it. That was the easy wave. The swarm hasn't shown its teeth yet. Ward's grin widened, hungry for the next explosion. Rhys flexed his bloodied hands as though eager for more. Veyne loaded a fresh magazine without comment, his movements as precise as before. They were not tired, they were not shaken. They were waiting. And in that moment, Thielen understood the true weight of the signal he had sent. The humans had come, yes. But they had brought with them a storm far more terrifying than the one he had hoped to escape. This is approximately 1,000 words, tightly focused on the first battle that defines humanity's combat style. Develops each character through their actions, and ends with the unsettling realization that the worst is yet to come. The fires of the valley still smoldered when night fell, painting the horizon in a haze of ash and smoke. The Velari soldiers tried to rest, their crests trembling in exhaustion. But they could not look away from the humans who sat apart from them, gathered around a small blaze. The men of Earth did not sleep easily. They sharpened their knives, checked their weapons, spoke in low voices meant only for one another. To the Velari, it was unsettling. Their saviors seemed less like comrades and more like predators huddled together after a kill. Captain Darius Kane leaned forward, the firelight drawing shadows across the scar that ran from his jaw to his temple. His eyes never softened, not even in rest. "This enemy," he said, his voice measured and calm, "fights. Without thought, without hesitation. But they have a center. All swarms do. Cut out the heart, and the body collapses." Sergeant Elias Ward threw a small stone into the fire, sparks leaping, as if in agreement. "You're talking about the Hive Queen. Dangerous idea, Captain, which means I like it." His grin was the same he wore in battle. A mixture of madness and eagerness that unsettled even his comrades. Lieutenant Marcus Veyne spoke without looking up from the rifle he was cleaning. Each motion was precise, economical, his fingers moving, as though guided by instinct rather than thought. "It's not dangerous," he said flatly. "It's necessary. If we fight wave after wave, we lose. Simple math. Kill the Queen, we end this." Corporal Jonah Rhys had remained silent, seated slightly apart, his bulk hunched over as he tightened the straps of his battered armor. His hands, scarred and stained, flexed as if remembering every strike and every wound. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and raw. "I'll get to her. Doesn't matter how deep she's buried. I'll find her." The Velari, who overheard, shuddered. No one volunteered for such a mission. No one spoke of storming the heart of a swarm hive as if it were a task already completed. Yet these men spoke of it as if inevitability was on their side. Later, as the night deepened, Thielen approached the fire. His words were careful, weighted with both respect and dread. "You speak as if this is not your first war against monsters like these?" Kane's gaze shifted to him. For a moment, silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Then the captain spoke. "We've fought worse." Ward chuckled, leaning back against a crate of munitions. "Worse, uglier, nastier. Don't matter. It all bleeds when you cut it the right way." Veyne finally looked up, his pale eyes unreadable. "You called us because you needed killers, not soldiers. Soldiers follow rules. Killers end threats." Thelien's crest lowered in unease. "But why only you? Why do humans send men like this instead of others?" Kane's expression hardened. He stared into the fire, as though weighing how much truth to give. "Because men like us don't belong anywhere else. We don't retire. We don't settle. We don't fit in cities or farms. War is where we live, and Earth knows it. When a call like yours comes, Earth doesn't send the men it hopes will survive. It sends the ones who already shouldn't. Rhys lifted his head, his eyes catching the firelight, and for a brief moment, Thielen saw something inhuman. They're not alien, but primal. The kind of ferocity no civilized species wanted to acknowledge still existed. The conversation ended as alarms blared across the camp. The swarm was moving again, a mass of dark shapes cresting the hills. Kane stood instantly, his voice sharp. Positions. We bleed them here. Then we go for the heart. The battle that followed was unlike the first. The Drexar came in greater numbers, their screeches splitting the night. The Velari lines buckled almost immediately, but the humans pressed forward. With terrifying confidence, Ward laced the ground with explosives, detonating charges in rapid succession until the battlefield shook like a storm. His laughter was constant, a mad rhythm that carried over the roar of collapsing earth. Veyne lay prone atop the ruins of a shattered defense tower, his rifle whispering death into the swarm. Each shot fell like a hammer on glass, precise, methodical, breaking the cohesion of the alien advance. He did not waste a single round, and Rhys became a nightmare in flesh. He waded into the swarm with knives flashing, fists breaking chitin, his body a whirlwind of violence. At one point, a Drexar warrior twice his size clamped its mandibles around his arm. Instead of retreating, he leaned forward, driving his blade into the creature's eye until it spasmed and collapsed, dragging him down. He rose again moments later, bloodied but grinning, as if daring the universe to try harder. Kane moved among them, directing with precision, his commands slicing through the chaos. Where he pointed, men struck. Where he ordered, enemies fell. His mind mapped the battle, in real time, seeing not individuals, but the flow of war itself, and bending it to his will. By dawn, the swarm was broken again. But unlike the first clash, it had taken its toll. Velari soldiers lay scattered among the alien corpses, their weapons spent, their spirits drained. The humans stood stained with ichor, battered but unbowed. They had fought like men who had no concept of retreat, no understanding of limits. When the last shot faded, Kane gathered his men. His voice was low, steady, carrying only to them. This doesn't end until the Queen is dead. Rest while you can. Tonight, we go into the hive. Ward stretched, wiping grime from his face, his grin still sharp. Now we're talking. Veyne silently checked his ammunition. Rhys flexed his fists, blood still dripping from his knuckles, and muttered, "Deep enough hole, she won't even see me coming." The Velari nearby exchanged fearful glances. To them, the hive was suicide. To these men, it was simply the next step. As the humans prepared for what was to come, Thielen felt the full weight of his decision. He had summoned humanity's deadliest to his world, and now there was no turning back. Rescue had become something darker, something unstoppable. And as he watched the humans disappear into their preparations, he wondered if, when the Queen finally fell, anything of Corporal 7 would remain unscarred. This section runs approximately 1,000 words, focuses on the men's backstories, philosophies, and their decision to take the fight to the Hive Queen while escalating the conflict and deepening character development. The march to the Hive began under a sky bruised with ash and smoke, the horizon lit by the glow of burning forests. Corporal 7 had been scarred beyond recognition. Its once verdant valleys torn open by fire and bombardment, its rivers running black. With alien ichor, the Velari survivors trailed behind in silence, unable to reconcile their gratitude with the horror etched into every step. At the front moved Kane and his men, weapons loaded, eyes sharp, each carrying himself with the calm certainty of those who had lived their entire lives walking toward violence. The entrance to the hive was a wound in the earth. a yawning cavern from which the stench of rot and chemical musk bled into the air. The Velari halted, their crests trembling, unable to force their bodies closer. Kane did not stop. He glanced back only once, his voice level. "Stay here. If we fail, it won't matter where you stand." Then he descended into the dark. Ward followed with a whistle on his lips, clutching a satchel heavy with charges. Veyne slid into position, his rifle balanced across his back, every movement silent, measured. Rhys came last, cracking his neck, his heavy footsteps echoing in the gloom like the toll of a bell. The tunnels were alive with sound, the clicking of mandibles, the skittering of countless limbs against stone. Shadows shifted on the walls as the swarm stirred, alerted by the intruders. Kane raised a fist, halting the line, and his voice dropped to a murmur. "They know we're here. Good. Let them come." The first wave of Drexar poured from the side. Passages, screeching, claws slashing. Ward threw a charge down the narrow corridor and detonated it, the blast painting the walls with fragments of chitin. He laughed as the dust washed over him, then shouted, "That's right, you bastards. More where that came from." His grin was feral, his joy unsettling. But his precision was undeniable, every explosive place to maximize carnage without slowing the advance. Veyne stepped ahead, raising his rifle. The weapons report was sharp, clean, controlled. Each shot cut a Drexar down before it could close the gap, his trigger finger steady as if he were sculpting the battle-won corpse. At a time. He never wasted ammunition, never hesitated. Where his gaze fell, the swarm died. Rhys charged when the tunnel narrowed, knives flashing. He met the Drexar in brutal silence, each strike a violent punctuation. When one of the beasts clamped onto his shoulder, he didn't fall back. He drove forward, slamming it against the wall until bone cracked and ichor sprayed across his face. His breathing grew ragged, but his eyes blazed with a savage delight. Pain was not an obstacle for him, it was fuel. Kane moved among them like a conductor of violence. Each order precise, his implant mapping their path deeper. He guided them with instinct and cold calculation, adjusting in real time as though the hive itself were a battlefield etched into his memory. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. His authority was absolute. The deeper they descended, the hotter the air grew, heavy with pheromones and the buzzing of wings. At last, they reached a cavern vast enough to hold a city. At its center pulsed the queen, a monstrous shape encased in chitin, her body swollen with birthing sacs, her mandibles dripping acid. She shrieked, the sound shaking the stone, and the hive erupted around her. The swarm came in endless waves. Walls writhed with movement as Drexar poured into the chamber. Kane raised his weapon, voice sharp. Ward set the nest alight. Veyne thinned their numbers. Rhys cut us a path. Ward moved first, racing across the cavern floor with the reckless speed of a man who trusted death would have to work harder to claim him. He planted charges along the birthing sacs, each click of the detonator a promise of annihilation. "Gonna burn you out from the inside, sweetheart?" he shouted, laughing as acid spit hissed past him. Veyne's shots echoed from the ridge above, each round breaking a Drexar's advance, buying Ward the seconds he needed. His rifle was an extension of his will, his expression unchanging as he dropped enemies in rhythmic precision. Rhys barreled forward, carving into the thickest press of the swarm. He fought like a beast loosed from chains, blades rising and falling with brutal grace. At one moment, he disappeared beneath a tide of bodies, and Kane thought him lost till the corporal burst upward, drenched in ichor, ripping the head from a warrior with his bare hands. He roared, and for a moment the swarm recoiled, as if even they recognized the predator in their midst. Kane pressed forward, firing into the horde, his implant feeding him angles, probabilities, pathways. His commands were sharp, unyielding, every word driving his men deeper into the madness. He moved not as a man, but as the mind of the entire unit, each piece of the battle flowing into place beneath his will. Ward's charges detonated. Fire, ripping through the birthing sacs. The queen shrieked, her body convulsing, the cavern trembling as flames consumed her brood. The swarm howled in unison, driven to frenzy by the queen's agony. They surged in a tidal wave, heedless of their own deaths. Kane's voice cut through the chaos. Veyne eyes on the queen. Rhys, drive for her thorax. Ward, with me finish this. Veyne's shot rang out, striking the queen's eye, blinding her on one side. Rhys leaped onto her heaving carapace, driving his blade deep into the joint of her mandible, holding fast as the creature thrashed. Ward sprinted past, dropping his last charge beneath her swollen abdomen. The queen reared, acid spraying in a deadly arc. Kane shoved Ward aside, the acid hissing across his own armor, burning deep into his flesh. He staggered, pain flaring white-hot, but did not fall. He raised his weapon and fired point-blank into the wound Rhys had carved. His shots tearing into the queen's brain. Ward's detonator clicked. The charge erupted beneath her, and the queen's body tore apart in a storm of fire and gore. The cavern shook, the swarm collapsing into disarray as their hive mind shattered. One by one, the Drexar fell, screeching, writhing, dying without. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of flames. Kane dropped to one knee, smoke rising from the acid burns across his armor. Ward limped back toward him, still grinning despite the blood running down his side. Veyne descended from the ridge, his rifle finally silent. Rhys slid from the queen's corpse, his body trembling with exhaustion, his knives still clutched. Tight-dot they stood in the ruin of the hive, for men alone among the dead. Kane looked at his brothers in arms, his voice rough but steady. It's done. When they emerged from the tunnels, the Velari were waiting. Their eyes widened at the sight of the humans, battered but alive, silhouetted against the rising smoke of the hive's collapse. For a moment, there was silence. Then a ripple of awe and fear swept through the ranks. General Thielen stepped forward, crest lowered in reverence. You have saved us, but I must ask, why only you? Why only the deadliest of your kind? Kane's gaze met his, hard and unflinching. Because men like us are the only ones willing to pay the cost. Earth doesn't send its best. It sends those who can't live any other way. He straightened, despite the burns etched into his skin. His voice iron. You wanted salvation. This is what it looks like. Ward laughed softly, muttering, hell of a rescue. Veyne said nothing, his eyes already scanning the horizon for threats that no longer came. Rhys wiped his blades clean, the fire in his eyes undimmed. Thielen bowed his head, words failing him. Around him, his soldiers whispered not in celebration, but in reverence, in dread. They had been spared, yes, but the price of their survival had been etched into the scars of their world as the humans turned away. Marching into the smoke without looking back, Thielen realized the truth. Corporal 7 had not been saved by soldiers. It had been saved by predators wearing human faces. And though the Drexar had been annihilated, the galaxy would never forget what it meant to summon Earth's deadliest men. This section delivers approximately 1,500 words worth of tension, escalation, character development, and a climactic resolution ending, with both triumph and unease true to HFY's tone of awe and dread.